What's going on, guys? We want to pick up where we left off, talking about our covenants. Asking the question, what is the Bible? And talked a little bit about two testaments. The last couple of videos. I think they were two, right? Two. I think we did two. Anyway. Talked a little bit about our testaments, what a testament is. Saw at the Bible, you ask anybody, hey, what are the two major divisions in the Bible? And everybody goes, hey, Old Testament, New Testament. And yet we don't often just take a break and think, well, why do we talk about testaments and what's a testament and what does that mean? Testaments are a type of covenant, special type of covenant. It's a covenant that takes force. Legal force, becomes legal and binding when the testator dies. Okay, so every testament is a covenant. That does not mean that every covenant is a testament. And that's going to be important today as we start looking at the 8 major covenants God made with man. Okay, and what are we doing? Well, we're going over all of this stuff in order to say, when we're studying the Bible, that's the main question there. What is the Bible? Okay, it's a history book. Obviously, there's history in it. It's got poetry in it. It's got proverbs in it. It's got doctrinal stuff in it. It's got epistles in it. Letters that Paul wrote. It's even got an apocalypse in it. The revelation of John. So, there's different types of books that are in there. Obvious prophecy. But in its total package, what is the Bible? When God gave us the Bible, He gave us the Scripture, 66 books. What is it? And my thesis, my claim here, here's what I'm learning from the Bible. What I gather from what I see in the Bible and what I've learned in the Bible is what I call a covenant corpus. Okay, corpus just means body. It's a collection of covenants. And you say, well, not every passage in the Bible has to do with covenants. Every passage of the Bible has to do either with the establishment of a covenant, the working out of that covenant, fulfillment of that covenant, or the breaking of that covenant. So what you see is, and this is what we're going to see in the 8 major covenants. Okay. We saw it with the 2 testaments. You take the Bible, you divide it up into Old Testament, New Testament. So the Bible in its most simple structure, okay, Old Testament, Old Testament, New Testament, two parts, one division. It is a covenant corpus. It's a body of literature, of writing that's made up of 2 covenants, 2 testaments. So obviously, in its most simple division, its most simple structure, you see that the Bible is a covenant corpus. Okay, so we're going to take that idea and we're going to move a little deeper into a little bit more detail. We're not going to go into a whole bunch of detail on the covenants. All I want to do is throw the idea out there and show you how the content of the Bible, the entire content of the Bible, basically, to steal the word from Schofield, crystallizes around the covenants God made with man. Now, we're going to look at 8 major covenants, okay? Understanding, again, what a covenant is. I'm calling a covenant, it's a legal binding agreement. It usually comes with an oath, okay? I will, and God swears, I will, if you want, oath. And He says, I will do this, okay? And so it goes a little bit beyond a contract because there's no negotiating. It's here it is, here's the deal, enter, and we're done. There's conditional and unconditional covenants, but outside of that, what you have is this formal legal binding agreement made between 2 parties, God and man. Okay, there is a 9th covenant, and we may talk about that later, Lord willing, and we can get ourselves into a frame of time management that we can actually redeem the time here and get out some videos in English, but. The 9th covenant is kind of fun, and I wanna talk about the 9th covenant when we go and talk about Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 and that wicked, awful gap that people just hate in Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. So there is a 9th covenant, but we're going to talk about the 8 major covenants that God made with man. Okay, these covenants, these 8 major covenants. Now, I mean, we could go into detail. I don't want to go into a whole lot of detail. Let me show you what I got here. When we talk about covenants, okay, yeah, I know. Okay, look, this is in English. You can figure it out. Okay, testamento is testament. Antiguo is like an antique. It's the Old Testament. Here's the New Testament. That's your Biblia. That's the Bible from Genesis to Apocalypse to Revelation. This is a timeline, okay? Timelines are important in Bible study, especially when we approach the Bible and start to look at the Bible through the lens of hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is how we perceive the Bible, how we study the Bible, how we understand what the Bible is. And we take a literal, normal hermeneutic. It's written in plain language that God speaks to. That we speak to each other. The King James Bible is written around fifth grade level English, so it's not that difficult to understand. It's not allegorical. It's not some mystical spiritual book that you've got to dig deep and know. It's right there, man. It's right there. Just ask yourself, what does the Bible say? Okay, so this is a timeline. Timeline helps us to establish the context, especially what I call the cumulative context, because if you're looking at Christ and you're looking at, let's say, the Gospels, you need to take into account the context of the Gospels. Obviously, what is happening just before, just after, what's going on with the people Christ is talking to and that thing. But you also, in order to understand what's happening in the history of the Gospels, you need to understand the cumulative context from the beginning, from Genesis all the way up to those Gospels. And so a timeline helps us to put ourselves in chronological order so we don't commit anachronisms. Anachronism is anachronos, okay? Chronos like chronology, like a watch. Chronos, ana is against, and an anachronistic error is putting something in time where it doesn't belong. And man, people do that all the time. They'll say, well, people in the Old Testament looked forward to the cross and they believed on Jesus and it was by faith, it was by grace through faith plus nothing. Well, that's nice, but that's an anachronistic error, okay? The Bible does not say that. You say that. We don't say that. Bible does not say that. So timelines help us to put things in chronological order, understand the context, cumulative context, and try to avoid those anachronistic errors, the anachronisms. So here we got Genesis to Revelation, okay? Genesis 1:1 to the Apocalypse, Revelation 22. I've put the 7 different dispensations in there: Eden, Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Iglesia. That's kind of a different word, isn't it? That's the church. Here's grace. It's an age of grace. We get raptured out and you start the tribulation, kind of divides in 2. And then you have the second coming of Jesus Christ, and he begins the millennium. That's a 1,000-year reign, and then we're off into eternity. Okay, everybody looks forward to the rapture, man. Everybody says, oh, I wish Jesus would come back soon. And I just think they don't understand the judgment seat of Christ when they say that. The rapture is not going to be a joyous occasion for the vast majority of God's people that are alive when it happens. It is God coming back and taking an unfaithful steward out of his stewardship and taking him to judgment, which is the judgment seat of Christ. Okay, so with those happy thoughts, let's just talk real briefly here, because I'm not gonna explain the 8 major covenants in order. Okay, I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna. What I want to do is show you how all these tie together, because the claim that Scofield made, and the term that I stole from him out of his Scofield, the old notes, is that the structure of the Bible, the content of the Bible, crystallizes around these 8 major covenants. Okay, and so when you see the 8 major covenants, it's basically the structure of the Bible, and we could approach it chronologically, and I'm going to show you that right here with this timeline. But what I want to do is start where we left off. I want to start with the New Testament. We talked about the Old Testament. We talked about the New Testament. We talked about there's only 2 testaments and they make up the entire Bible, okay? And so your Bible is basically a group of books that have to do with one testament and then another testament. These testaments are covenants, like we learned. Okay, so let's run through this, okay? I wanted you to see this. Back in the Garden of Eden, Genesis 1:26, 1:27, 28, when God says, be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and he gives Adam and Eve a charge and makes them stewards, gives them a stewardship. And that's the Edenic covenant. Okay, so that's the one that they start with, and then of course they sin. And you see that little line? You see that little line I drew in there? Why? Because that's where the Old Testament, the actual testament in the animal sacrifices, starts with this covenant, pacto. Okay, pacto is a pact. That's the word in Spanish for covenant. And Adam. So this is the Adamic covenant that we call the curse in Genesis 3. So that was the next one. So God started with a covenant where he used a covenant to dispense a stewardship to Adam and Eve in the garden. They were unfaithful, so God removes them from that stewardship and judges them. That's the curse upon sin. And then he interjects himself into man's history, and he gives a little bit more progressive revelation by giving them the Adamic covenant. And that Adamic covenant then of course has to do with the age of conscience. Okay, he dispenses a stewardship where man is to govern himself by conscience, and then of course they screw that up. And we have the flood that kills everybody, and then God enters into a covenant with Noah, the Noahic covenant in Genesis 8 and 9 after the flood. And then he begins with the Abrahamic covenant. We're going to see that that's a little bit more special than these. God makes all these three with all the nations. Okay, this is Adam and Eve. This is Adam and Eve and everybody that comes after them. God kills everybody in the flood and starts again with Noah and his family. So all three of these basically have to do with mankind. Okay, but when we start with Abraham, God chooses Abraham, calls him out, and makes a very special covenant with him. We're going to talk about that in this video, unless God raptures us out beforehand. After the covenant of Abraham in Genesis 12, 15, 17, 22, we have the covenant that God makes with Israel through Moses, the Mosaic Covenant, which a lot of people call the law. The law was given within the confines and the construct of the Mosaic Covenant. It's not the Mosaic Covenant, it's part of it. And then you have the Palestinian covenant. I know people hate that word, Palestinian. Okay, call it what you want. It's not named. It could be called the second Mosaic covenant because God gave it through Moses. It's a covenant that has to do with the life of Israel in the land. And the land is the land of the Philistines. Okay, Philistines is the word from which we get Palestine. Palestine is the land of the Philistines. And so because this covenant is tied for Israel, tied very, very specifically with the promised land that he gave in the covenant of Abraham, this is called the Palestinian covenant, just for ease of reference. Okay, and then you have the Davidic covenant, has to do with the throne, and then of course the new covenant that was promised in the Old Testament and then was ratified on the cross. Okay, with Jesus Christ, does not come into effect until its inauguration in the second coming of Jesus Christ. Okay, so that's briefly. You've got 1, 2, 3. Oh man, I've got it over here. Hang on. I made you a list so that you can see what I'm doing and what I'm thinking. Okay, you've got the first three that God made with all people: Edenic, Adamic, and Noahic covenants. This was in the Garden of Eden. This was after the Garden of Eden. This was after the flood, Noahic. And then God calls Abraham out. Now these last 5, Abraham, Moses, Palestine, Davidic, the New Covenant, these 5 covenants make up what the Bible calls covenants of promise. Okay, these covenants of promise are made with Israel. And note the distinction. This is easy to see. You can read the first 9 chapters of your Bible and you can understand, hey, look, all of these formal legal agreements that God makes, these covenants, they are made with all men. There's no Jews, there's no Israel. But with Abraham, something very special happens. And God calls out Abraham, says, I'm going to make this covenant with you in Genesis 12 and your physical descendants. And we see that his physical descendants are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob, who's called Israel, he has 12 kids, 12 boys. And they make up the 12 tribes of Israel. And God makes the Mosaic covenant with them, with Israel, the physical descendants of Abraham through Isaac and Jacob. And then we have the Palestinian covenant, which now look, when we get back to this guy, okay, look at this line. You see this line? That means something, okay? The Abrahamic covenant is kind of separate, okay? It forms part of these 5, but the covenant he made with Moses has to do with the rest of them because the Palestinian covenant is made within the context of the Mosaic covenant, just like the Davidic covenant and just like the new covenant. They're all made within the confines of the Mosaic covenant. So these are all tied together and they all reference back to this covenant of Abraham, because in the covenant of Abraham is basically where you find that promise, the promise. Okay, God says, Yeah, you screwed it up in Eden. Okay, Adam and Eve and their descendants screwed it up before the flood. Noah, yeah, screwed it up. And then comes the Tower of Babel and the languages and all that. And God says, look, forget it. Let me just do it. And so through these covenants, we see God working out his plan of salvation for us. So these are the 8 major covenants God made with man. Like I said, there's one prior covenant that we're going to talk about when we get into the into the gap, okay, which, man, hopefully we can do soon. That's a fun study. We might just start with that one of these days after I get back from my trip. I'm going down south, down to Columbia here this week, and hopefully I can get this video done, get you another video going, and then we can pick it back up when I get home. Unless, of course, I stay down there, which is always a temptation. So we're going to pick up where we left off. 2 testaments, okay? We spent a lot of time here in our this is Hebrews 9, book of Hebrews, chapter 9. This is our full mention passage of testaments, and we spent some time here, 9:15. For this cause, he, Christ, is the mediator of the New Testament, okay, that by means of death, for the redemption of the transgressions that were under the first testament. So we've got a new and we've got a first. So that means there's a first and a second, and a new and an old. That's where we get those terms, New and Old Testament. And they which are called might receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. Then we see this down here again, whereupon neither the first testament was dedicated without blood. That was the first, the old. And in 10:9, kind of the same reference. Then said he, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away the first. That is the Old Testament with animal sacrifices. Don't know if you guys can see that if you're playing with your phones and trying to watch this video on a phone. I hate cell phones, man. I just hate them. It's the bane of our existence. It's going to be the mark of the beast, man. Then he said, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away the first, which is the Old Testament, the animal sacrifices God started back in Genesis 3:21. And that he may establish the second. That's the New Testament and Christ's sacrifice there on the cross for us. So we got 2 testaments. Those 2 testaments make up the whole Bible. Basically, these 2 testaments, they deal very specifically with salvation. Okay, so 9:22, we made a big deal out of this verse. Almost all things are by the law purged with blood. Without shedding of blood, there is no remission. So when we look at these testaments, the shedding of blood, the killing of an innocent sacrifice, we're talking about the shedding of blood for remission of sins. So the New Testament and the Old Testament, both testaments have to do very specifically with salvation, okay? Even back down here to 9:16 and 17. For where a testament is, there must also of necessity be the death of the testator. We know that. Okay, this deals with our salvation. A testament is of force after men are dead. Otherwise, it is of no strength at all while the testator liveth. So when we look at Christ, Christ died, buried, rose again the 3rd day. Why did he die? Because God pronounced a death sentence on Adam. You eat of that tree, and that day thou shalt surely die. It says it again in Ezekiel 18, where he talks about the soul that sinneth, it shall die. And he repeats it in Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. Okay, so Christ paid the wages of sin in full. He died. Okay, that's the testimony of a testament. Okay, we see that again, Hebrews 10. Again, playing around with our passage of our full mention passage. He says, now where remission of these is, there is no more offering, obviously referring to Jesus Christ and the sacrifice that he made on the cross and the remission, the eternal and perfect and complete remission of sins that we get in that. But now, when we talk about the Old Testament and the New Testament, that's basically what we're talking about. So when you see those 2 major divisions of the Bible, God had one system of salvation in the Old Testament. From Genesis up to Malachi, or basically Genesis up to the crucifixion, you have one system of salvation, and it's through animal sacrifices. Yes, we saw with Abel. Abel, by faith, offered the sacrifice that God accepted. He offered the lamb, the animal sacrifice, just like he saw God do for Adam and Eve when God clothed them with animal skins. Okay, so it's a system of sacrifices for the salvation of man. The New Testament is a system of sacrifice for the salvation of man. It's a sacrifice of Jesus Christ. So when we see that division of the Old Testament and the New Testament, understand that what you're seeing is 2 different ways of salvation. Obviously, salvation comes by grace. Obviously, it is never by man's merit. We do not deserve salvation, okay? I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is God had a system of sacrifice of animals. That system is no longer in place. That was the first system, the old system. And now he has a new system in place, which is based on the death of Jesus Christ, okay? So that's all we're saying. Old Testament, New Testament, two systems of salvation, two systems of innocent sacrifice for the remission of sins of sinful man. So that's where we're going to start, okay? What I want to do, we've got these 8 major covenants, okay? Here's our 8 major covenants. I'm going to be referring back to this a little bit, so I'm going to plop that right there. 8 major covenants. We could look at them in chronological order. I don't want to do that because I want to do something that's a little bit more interesting. I've been trying to write this study up for like a year or 2 or 3 or 4, and I just can't get it done. I keep playing around in English and doing most of it in Spanish, and I can't get it done. So I've done so much with the chronological order that frankly, when I wrote this study up, I didn't want to play around with the chronological order anymore. I wanted to do something different. So we're going to work backwards into it. We're going to start with the New Testament. The New Testament. Now, the New Testament, remember, all the New Testament is the sacrifice of Jesus Christ for sinful man. It's like that's all it is. I mean, that's a bunch, okay? That's for me, that's enough. That's it. But there's more to the relationship that man has with God and God has with man than salvation. You guys know that, okay? We're born again, and then we begin this process of sanctification. God wants to do a whole lot more with lost man than just save him, okay? So we need to take this New Testament and understand this. The New Testament is inextricably tied to the New Covenant. Those are two different things. They're two totally different animals, and I know that's hard to understand because Testament and covenant are two different words, okay? A New Testament is not necessarily the New Covenant. Could be because a testament's a covenant, but not necessarily. And so the New Testament is a provision within the New Covenant, okay? Now, I'm gonna stick right here, okay? Go back to this verse. Here's what we're gonna do. And that's my thumb. I gotta get that out of the picture. It's kind of weird. At least it's clean, right? It says, for this cause, he, Christ, is a mediator. Okay, now let's focus on that. Remember, that's a word, mediator. Okay, key word. Remember that, okay? This cause, he, Jesus Christ, is a mediator of the New Testament. That refers to his death, that by means of death, for the redemption, salvation of the transgressions, dealing with sin that were under the first testament, sacrifice of animals. They which are called might receive the promise of eternal inheritance. Okay, so Jesus Christ became the mediator of a New Testament, okay? He became the mediator of a new system of substitutionary sacrifice for the remission of sins. We know that, okay? We got that. We understand that. We've been through that. Now, let's go back to Hebrews. Why did I go there? I've got this so messed up. Where do we go? I want to go to Hebrews 8. Okay, Hebrews 8. Because we see that Jesus Christ is also the mediator of a new covenant. Look at verse 6. But now, okay, again, this is Hebrews, book of Hebrews. We're in chapter 8, verse 6. Now hath he obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he, Jesus Christ, okay, he is the mediator of a better what? Covenant, which was established upon better promises. Now watch this. For if that first covenant, Mosaic covenant, had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for the second covenant, okay? For finding fault with them, he saith, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they continue not in my covenant. And I regarded them not, saith the Lord, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days. And then he goes on, okay? This citation right here, for he saith, and he's citing here, Jeremiah 31:31-34, this better covenant, better than the first covenant, better than the covenant that God made with them when he came out of Egypt, the Mosaic covenant, that covenant that they broke. is the new covenant, so that we see now, look, we see that Jesus Christ in Hebrews 9:15 is called the mediator of a new testament. He's also called here in Hebrews 8 the mediator of a new covenant. Okay, those are two different things, but that difference comes from the fact that the New Testament forms part of the new covenant. The new covenant is broader. Okay, there's a difference here. The New Testament is related to salvation. Okay, the remission of sins, sacrifice, remission of sins, His blood was shed, given to all men, Jews and Gentile alike. But this new covenant, however, is given to Israel and Israel only. And the New Testament that deals with salvation, that's the only thing God took out to the Gentiles. When we talk about the Jews in the book, in the Gospels and book of Acts, rejecting the Messiah and God taking the gospel out to the Gentiles, okay, through Paul, we need to understand that what went out was not the entire new covenant, was not the entire corpus of covenants that God made with Israel. He gave us salvation in Jesus Christ, the New Testament, not the new covenant, okay? So the new covenant is given, it's given only to Israel, and it deals with a whole lot more than salvation, okay? So I want to focus on this. We're not gonna dig into all the details of the new covenant, but I just want to mention a couple of things, okay? Here's what Paul is citing in Hebrews chapter 8. He does it again in Hebrews chapter 10, okay? Behold, where do we want to start? I mean, it starts down here in 27, but I want to start in 31. Okay, 31, because this should sound familiar. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah, not with Gentiles, not with the church. You are not Israel. You are not spiritual Israel, okay? You're a Gentile dog that God saved so He can make Israel jealous. Read Romans 11. Verse 32, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. Okay, we know when they went out of Egypt, they landed at Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, through Moses, God gave the Mosaic Covenant. Okay, Mosaic Covenant, there it is. Okay, which my covenant they break. Yes, they did, although I was a husband unto them. But this shall be my covenant that I will make with the house of Israel, not with Gentiles, not with the church. Okay, no. Now, I'm going to read down through all of these stipulations. Okay, these are the stipulations. Jeremiah 31, 33, and 34. There's 7 of them. Okay? He says, after those days, key phrase in your Bible, refers to the tribulation, saith the Lord, I will put my law. This happens at the second coming of Jesus Christ for the nation of Israel. I will put my law in their inward parts. That's I will. Unconditional. God will do that. It will be done. Okay? Write it upon their hearts. And will be their God, and they shall be my people. This is like unconditional stuff. This is going to happen. Okay? They shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord. Okay? Like Sean Holes does out on the campuses. Support your local street preacher, your local campus preacher. Luke 10:2 Ministries. Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, saith the Lord. Now watch it, because here comes the provision of the New Testament encased in this new covenant. For I will forgive their iniquity. And you say, well, I got that. And I will remember their sin no more. I got that. It's called eternal security. Okay, so the testament portion of the covenant, okay, the stipulations, out of the 7, there's 2. The stipulations that deal with salvation through the remission of sins is found primarily right here. Now, there's a couple of more things that we get, okay, in Jesus Christ that you can't see right here in this passage. But for right now, just look, I will forgive their iniquity. I will remember their sin no more. That's salvation and eternal security of our salvation. Once you got this salvation, this right here, this salvation, once you got it, you can't lose it. Because once you get this forgiveness, God says, okay, I'm done. I will remember your sin no more. It's not like up here, which my covenant they break. Okay, God said, man, I'm remembering this. Okay, no, down here he says, nope. In this new covenant, you're in. Once you get in to this, once I forgive your sin, I'm going to remember it no more. We got that. Okay, we got that. God promises forgiveness of iniquity, and He promises to remember their sin no more. That is the eternal remission of sins. That's the eternal redemption. I almost said redención. And so this Hebrews 9 and 10 is Hebrews 8, 9, and 10. This is it. Okay, but I mean, this whole new covenant here, this new covenant in Jeremiah, it has a whole lot more to do with than just salvation. There's a whole slew of different stipulations within this legal covenant that God makes with Israel. Okay, the New Testament is a provision within the new covenant. The covenant is broader. It's got a scope that reaches out beyond just salvation. Because the Jews, the Israelites that receive, that get in on the new covenant, they get forgiveness of sins, they get eternal security, but they also get the law written on their inward parts, on their hearts. God will be their God and they shall be his people. They will no more teach anybody. Every man's going to know the Lord. I mean, there's a whole lot more going on in the new covenant than just salvation, forgiveness of sins, and eternal security. So the New Testament, now listen, the New Testament is in effect today. We get the New Testament. That's how we get salvation. That is our system of sacrifice, okay? Hebrews 9:14, Hebrews 9:26. This is us. But we don't get the New Covenant. The new covenant was promised in the Old Testament, Jeremiah 31. It was ratified on the cross with Jesus Christ. There's no more work to do. Done. But it doesn't get inaugurated. It doesn't become of force and legal strength. It doesn't get put in place until the second coming of Jesus Christ. Okay? So that's the new covenant. Now, for our purposes here, okay, what we're doing, and we're asking ourselves, what is the Bible? And Greg is saying the Bible is a covenant corpus. It is a body of literature that crystallizes around the 8 major covenants. Everything you see in the Bible has to do with the covenants that God made with his creatures, okay? And so I want you to notice here, and the point I'm trying to make is that the New Testament, right here, this New Testament, is inextricably tied to the new covenant. Okay? That's the point to make. The two are inseparable. Okay? If you want to understand the New Testament, you need to go back to the new covenant. But you can't understand the new covenant in its entirety if you don't separate it from what God is doing in the New Testament. So the two, now the new covenant, we could say, if we want to steal Schofield's word again, the new covenant crystallizes around the New Testament. The New Testament is couched in, okay, I think when I use that word couched, it always sticks in my head because the way it was described to me was it's like a diamond. And you put a diamond in a ring, it's couched within a mount. That mount is usually decorative, and it shows that stone. It shows it out, it shows it off. You know, it illuminates it, it surrounds it. It's couched. This stone is couched in the mount of the ring, and it beautifies it. Well, the New Testament is couched within the New Covenant. The New Covenant crystallizes around the New Testament. And the New Testament, in effect today, active, in effect, it's ours. It's tied to the New Covenant, which is promised, but not in effect until the second coming. So here's how we're doing this. We're working back. We talked in our last video a lot about the Testaments, okay, the New Testament. Well, okay, to understand the New Testament, you have to go back to the New Covenant, okay? To understand that New Testament today, you go back to passages like Jeremiah to see how does this relate to us today? Why are we getting this today? And you have to go to Acts. It's Acts 28:28. Becca just came over. She's my daughter. She's a nurse. She works a night shift. She brought pizza. What I'm talking about is Acts chapter 28. Okay, in Acts chapter 28, this is why Paul says what he says when he's talking to the Jews. He goes to Rome. You guys know the story. This is the very last portion of the Acts chapter 28, and then we go off into Romans. Paul says, look, he's talking to the Jews. The Jews are like, yeah, we don't know. Some of us are kind of like sort of, and some of us don't really care. And Paul reams them out. Okay, he reproves them. And then he says, be it known therefore unto you, Jews, that the salvation of God is sent unto the Gentiles, and that they will hear it, okay? That's the same salvation that God offered to Israel. It is not the new covenant, it's the New Testament. And so that's what I'm saying is right here, this new covenant. We don't get the new covenant. That's why Paul said the salvation, that's why he used that word, that article, okay? Definite article. He says, this is what we get: forgiveness of iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. So it deals with, the New Testament deals with salvation. And that's what Paul says is going out to the Gentiles, not the entire new covenant. The new covenant is not ours. Okay. It's not. Okay. But don't miss this. Here's what we're doing. We're working our way back. Okay. New Testament is part of the new covenant. You can't understand the New Testament and what we got in our salvation unless you understand the new covenant in its totality. I mean, obviously you can understand you need to repent and believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, you'll be saved, and you got eternal security. That's not that difficult. But when you start digging into it and you say, well, where did this come from? Why did we get it? We're not Jews. We're not Israel. Why, what, and what's going on? We're talking about the Bible and putting the Bible together. Well, then you have to go back to this new covenant, because the New Testament is part of the new covenant. New covenant crystallized around the New Testament couched in the new covenant. Okay, but watch this, watch. One step back. This new covenant is inextricably tied to the Mosaic Covenant. Okay? Jeremiah 31:31. We're still in the book of Jeremiah. Okay, same passage that deals with the aforementioned passage that deals with the new covenant. When God establishes this new covenant with Israel, here, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant. That's why we call it the new covenant. House of Israel, house of Judah. It's with the nation of Israel. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was an husband unto them, saith the Lord. But this shall be the covenant. And God says, I'm going to be their God. They shall be my people. They is Israel. And they that get to become God's people is because they, Israel, broke the covenant he made with them when they came out of Egypt. So they get the new covenant because they screwed up the old one, the Mosaic covenant. Okay, so God said he was a husband unto Israel. Okay, he likens the relationship he has with Israel under the Mosaic covenant to a marriage that was broken. Israel broke that marriage. Okay, they broke that marriage with their infidelity. It's called adultery. Spiritual apostasy is adultery. Okay, that's idolatry. They're going off and worshiping other gods. But under the new covenant, there's going to be a reconciliation. Those who broke the first covenant, okay, those who are separated from God because they broke the Mosaic covenant are the ones that get the reconciliation of the new covenant. The new covenant is inextricably tied to the Mosaic covenant, okay? And so to understand the new covenant, we need to understand the Mosaic covenant. And two, we're not going to go all the way into all these big deep details, but watch. Here's what I want to do. Because you're not going to get, see, here's the new covenant, okay? Watch this. Shoot, I can't do that with that one. This new covenant, you don't understand the new covenant until you understand the old covenant. They broke this covenant, so God says, I'm going to make a new covenant and we're going to be reconciled. This covenant, the covenant of Moses, is inextricably tied to the covenant that God made with Abraham. Okay, everything that God said, he says, I promise all of these goodies to Abraham in my covenant I make with them, he gave to Israel through a conditional covenant, the covenant of Moses. Okay, so we're going to walk through this. Okay, we're going to walk through this. I want to show you New Testament inextricably tied to the new covenant. Okay, but they're two different things. This is part of the new covenant, but not the new covenant in its totality. To understand the new covenant, we need to understand the Mosaic covenant. Okay, why? Because the same people who get the reconciliation of the new covenant are those who screwed up the relationship they had with God under the Mosaic covenant. But you need to understand the Abrahamic covenant in order to understand the Mosaic covenant, because the Mosaic covenant is made within the context of the Abrahamic covenant. Okay, so going back to Genesis, okay, when we talk about the new covenant, the Mosaic covenant, both of those inextricably tied to the Abrahamic covenant, we have to go to Genesis chapter 12. Okay, the new covenant. God made an unconditional covenant with Abraham and with Abraham's physical descendants, okay, his physical seed. And we're not going to go into it, but that seed is through Isaac, okay, not Ishmael, Isaac. And Isaac, and then Jacob, who is called Israel. So this is where it all starts. This is the Abrahamic covenant. Now, you'll look at the Abrahamic covenant, and I think I got this back here on my, in the Abrahamic covenant, It starts off in Genesis 12. God adds to it again in 15, in 17, and then again in 22. And in 22, he kind of seals the deal. So you see God kind of working out the details and the stipulations with Abraham throughout those chapters 12 to 22 in the book of Genesis. But just looking at this, look, two key passages we're going to look at. We're going to look at Genesis 12, 1 to 3, and then we're going to look at Genesis 17, okay? But look what he says. Now the Lord had said, now this is right after, okay, context. It's in Genesis 12. So what do we know? The whole earth was one language, one speech, and it came to pass, and they did this, and God said, let's go down and confound their language. And he does. That is a judgment upon the people who were supposed to live under the covenant of Noah. And God said, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. And what did they say? What did they say? They said, go, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, that lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth. Well, God told them to go be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth, to replenish the earth, okay? And the Lord came down and said, well, if they don't want to do it, then we're going to confound the language. And when he did that, they left off to build the city, and they were scattered abroad thence upon the face of all the earth. So that's God's judgment upon the unfaithful stewards during the dispensation, the stewardship that God gave through Noah. Okay, so then he says, all right, I'm going to do something different, right? So Noah screwed it up. Okay, Adam and Eve screwed it up in the garden. He did something different, Adamic Covenant. They screwed it up and killed him in the flood, and then they're going to do something different, and they screwed it up, and God judged them with the nations, the tongues. And then we get to chapter 12. This is the Abrahamic Covenant. This is the first covenant of promise. This is the covenant with the promise, because look what God does. He establishes, okay, there's some conditions to enter into the covenant. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. Okay, so there's some conditions here. He needs to separate from his country, from his kindred, from his house, and go unto this land, the land that he promised, okay, which we're going to see is the land of, I don't think I have it in here, the land of Canaan. Okay. And then he says, if you do this, then you enter into a covenant. And the covenant is unconditional. Once Abraham fulfills these conditions, it's done. He's in this covenant, and it's unconditional. The only conditional part of it is you got to do this to get in. Okay, God says you need to get out of your country and get into the land. Well, he did that immediately. You need to get away from your kindred and away from your father's house. But he's got a problem with this kid called Lot, okay, because Lot went with him, okay, and Abraham took Lot. And we see Lot all the way up to Genesis 19 causing problems, okay. Now, so he says, now get out from your country, from your father's house unto a land that I'll show you. Fine. And he says, I will, unconditional, I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great. Thou shalt, without condition, be a blessing, and I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them and curse him that curseth thee. That's, I will. There is no condition on that. The nations, even today, that are friends of Israel have God's blessing on them. You watch the nations that are enemies of Israel, and they're kicking against the pricks, man. They're kicking against God. And so he says, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So now salvation and the blessings of God will come through, ultimately through the physical descendants of Abraham, specifically the physical descendant Jesus Christ, who is the seed of Abraham. So Abraham departed as the Lord had spoken unto him. So that's partial obedience. And Lot went with him. That is a pending obedience. And Abraham was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abraham took Sarah his wife and Lot his brother's son. So it's his nephew. And they go off. That's the beginning of the Abrahamic covenant. But what I want you to see is this is the first of the covenants of promise. Okay. Now go over to Ephesians 2:12. Read what that says about Gentiles and the covenants of promise. Okay, we were strangers of the covenants of promise. We don't get this. This is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who is called Israel, and it goes to the 12 tribes of Israel, the nation of Israel. I will, thou shalt, I will, and shall all families. Okay, it is an unconditional promise. That's where it all starts. It is the covenant of promise. When you see Paul in Galatians referring to the promise, okay, in Abraham, that's it. Okay, that's it. Yes, it gets modified a little bit in chapter 15, 17, and 22. of Genesis. But look what we got. This is Genesis 17. Okay, Genesis 17. Abraham, we're talking about him again. This is God adding a little bit to it. And I want you to see what Abraham gets without condition, okay? And when Abraham was 90 years old and 9, the Lord appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God. Walk before me and be thou perfect. Couldn't we say a bunch about that? And I will make my covenant between me and thee. You see, it's still kind of, God's still forming the stipulations and forming this covenant that he makes with Abraham, and he finalizes it. I'm pretty sure, I'm still not done with the study, but I'm pretty sure it's in Genesis 22 when he goes to kill Isaac, and God says, no, we're done. And he gives him the full and complete promise of this Abrahamic covenant. But anyway, he says, I'll make my covenant between me and thee and will multiply thee exceedingly. Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, as for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Again, what you see is, I will multiply. Thou shalt. These are unconditional promises. Neither shall thy name be any more called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations I have made thee. And he says, I will, unconditional, I will make thee exceeding fruitful. I will make nations of thee. And now watch, kings shall come out of thee. The kingdom is given to Abraham in the Abrahamic covenant. So wait. What do you have? You got, I'll bless thee. I'm going to make a nation of thee. All the nations of the earth are going to be blessed in thee. And he says, you know what? I'm going to make kings come out of thee. Abraham and his descendants are the inheritors of the kingdom. You say, well, which kingdom? The kingdom. The whole thing, man. Because the kingdom split. You know that. Back in when Adam sinned, the kingdom split, right, into three. Okay, you have the kingdom of God, which is spiritual, the kingdom of heaven, which is soulish, and you have the kingdoms of this world, okay, the kingdoms of the earth, which is carnal. And so those go back together in the kingdom, and Abraham, his descendants, get it based on the promise God made to Abraham in this unconditional covenant. Fabulous stuff, man. I mean, everybody says the Bible's boring. Yeah, because you just don't, like my pastor said this morning, you just don't love it. I mean, you got to love that book, man. You love that book, and you'll learn it. God will show you some things. I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed, okay? Now watch, this is an unconditional, eternal covenant of promise that passes from Abraham to his physical descendants. He says, I'm going to make it with thee and thy seed after thee and their generations for an everlasting covenant. It is not only unconditional, it is eternal. That's what everlasting means, okay? I studied it in the original languages, and it is a compound word. It comes from last and ever. Last forever. Everlasting covenant. It means eternal, okay? To be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee. And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land. And so we see also that the land, what we call the promised land, okay? God gave the land to Abraham and to thy seed after thee, and the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, okay, which is the land of the Philistines. I mean, it's a bunch, dude. It's a huge chunk of land for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So if you want to know why this whole thing with Canaan, okay, and God says you go in and you kill the Canaanites, Canaan has a problem, okay? You need to go back to Genesis chapter 9 to figure that out. That's where you start with that. So there's obviously a lot going on, okay? And you can see my little line goes over here, because when God changes Sarah's name, God said unto Abraham, as for Sarai, thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be. I will bless her and give thee a son also of her. That's Isaac. And I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations, and kings of people shall be of her. So you've got the same promise. So kings, the kingdom now belongs to Abraham and his descendants through his son Isaac through Sarah. Okay, so there's obviously with all of this, there's a lot going on in passages that deal with the Abrahamic covenant in the book of Genesis. I'm going to simplify it, okay? And I'm going to say something. Some people have misunderstood this. Don't misunderstand it. What I'm trying to do is just simplify it so we can work with these concepts. And I want you to get what I'm kind of throwing out here. Because of the Abrahamic covenant, because it is unconditional, because the promises God gave Abraham in this covenant are unconditional, his physical seed, These covenants passed from Abraham to Isaac and then to Jacob, who God changes his name to Israel. He has 12 kids, 12 boys, another daughter. These promises that God gave Abraham unconditionally and eternally passed to his physical descendants. And so look, Abraham and his physical descendants, everybody gets in. They all get it. All of Abraham's physical descendants, through Isaac and Jacob, Israel, have been unconditionally promised the blessings from God. This includes spiritual blessings. This includes physical blessings. This includes the blessing of the promised land. It's the land that belongs to Israel. Everybody else needs to get out. Okay, this includes the blessing over the rest of the nations of the world, because Abraham's descendants will be the kings who reign and rule over the Gentile nations for the blessing of the Gentile nations. Look, this Abrahamic covenant is the covenant of the great promise. It is unconditional, it is eternal, and it's for Israel. It's for all of Israel's descendants. Okay, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob, who is called Israel. Okay, so everybody gets in. You see this in the Gospels. This is why Jesus rebuked the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes. He says, look, you think you get in because you're a child of Abraham. He says, God can raise up, the children of Abraham from these stones. Don't think you get in because you're just a child of Abraham. That's why he's saying these things. Because they go back to passages like this and they say, hey, look, we're the physical descendants of Abraham. We get in automatically because we were born of the physical line of Abraham. That's what this says. If we did not have any more of the progressive revelation of God in Scripture, that's exactly what it would be, because that's exactly what God said. I will bless you and your descendants. And then that blessing passed from Abraham to Isaac. And he says, I'll bless you and your physical descendants. And then to Jacob, changed his name to Israel. He says, I'll bless you and your physical descendants. And the Israelites were like, well, hey, I'm a physical descendant. I'm in. Man, I'm in. I get the blessing. I get to reign. I get to rule. I'm it. Right? Well, that's right, except God gave a little bit more progressive revelation. There's history going on, okay? God is working out his plan and his purpose through human history. Here's where I'm saying you need to understand how the Mosaic Covenant relates to the Abrahamic Covenant, because when we get to the Mosaic Covenant, this is Exodus 19. Exodus, obviously, Israel has made this mass exodus from Egypt. They're at Mount Sinai, okay, and God is beginning to establish his Mosaic Covenant with them. Okay, key chapter here, or key passage in Exodus 19 is verse 5 to verse 8. This is a conditional covenant. This is not like the Abrahamic covenant. What God does right here, and I'm going to read it in just a minute. What God does right here is with the Mosaic covenant, he puts all of the blessings that he promised to Abraham in the Abrahamic covenant, and he puts them under one condition. He says, you'll get the blessings if you obey me. Okay? Watch this. God talking to Moses. Now, therefore, if, you see that word? That's your conditional covenant. If ye will obey my voice indeed, and if ye will keep my covenant, then it is a conditional covenant. Then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me. That's part of the Abrahamic covenant. Now it's conditioned upon obedience. Above all people, above all the nations, for all the earth is mine, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom, if you obey, if you keep, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. And so Moses came and called for the elders of the people, and he laid before their faces all these words which the Lord commanded him. Now watch this. All the people, everybody, the whole nation answered together and said, here's where they enter into this covenant. All that the Lord hath spoken, we will do. Moses returned to the words of the people unto the Lord. And so they enter into a covenant, a conditional covenant. And the condition is obedience in order to obtain and experience all of the blessings and the promises of the Abrahamic covenant. All the people of Israel now need to obey God's voice and keep his covenant. Now, this is why immediately after they make this commitment, they make this covenant oath, God gives them what? The Ten Commandments. That's the beginning of the law, the Ten Commandments. And so then after the Ten Commandments and a few other laws, God comes back to them and he says, are you sure? This is Exodus 24. And in Exodus 24, we see that this covenant becomes ratified. And it becomes ratified because of the shedding of blood. Okay? Moses came. This is Moses. He came unto the Lord. Thou and Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders to worship afar. Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but they shall not come nigh. Okay, so we're talking about Moses coming up to God and getting the law. Now, Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments, and all the people answered with one voice. This is just like in Exodus 19. After they got the Ten Commandments, after they got some other civil laws, God says, okay, you really want to do this? And they all said with one voice, all. Now watch that. You see that verse? Okay, that word. I got to jump up in the page. All. They said, all the words which the Lord hath said, we or will we do. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, rose up early in the morning, built an altar on the hill and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. He sent young men of the children of Israel, which offered burnt offerings, sacrifice, peace offerings, oxen unto the Lord. Moses took half of the blood, put it on the basins. Half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Now watch what he does right here. And he took the book of the covenant and read in the audience of the people. And they said, all that the Lord hath said will we do and be obedient. That's done. Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, behold the blood of the covenant, the Mosaic covenant, the conditional covenant, which the Lord hath made with you concerning all these words of the law of Moses. Okay? So Israel obviously could never keep up with their end of the deal. They agreed to do all that the Lord commanded them, all in the law of Moses. And so again, look, let's simplify this. The unconditional Abrahamic covenant of promise means all Israel, the physical descendants of Abraham through Isaac and Jacob, all Israel gets in. That's it. It's an unconditional promise. But under the conditional Mosaic covenant, everyone is excluded from blessing the blessings of the Abrahamic covenant because they failed to meet the condition of the covenant, total and complete obedience. That's why God speaks of divorcing Israel. He says, I was a husband to them. You see, when they failed in their obedience, the Israelites broke the Mosaic covenant. Now, they did it, obviously, they did it 7 times. There's 7 renewals, 7 different renewals, and I'll give you the references one of these days. 7 different renewals of the Mosaic covenant. They break it. First one is the golden calf, Exodus 32. They break it immediately, and then God renews it, okay? God renews it. And so you see him break the covenant, renews it, breaks the covenant, renews it, all the way up to Coniah. And with Jeconiah, God says, nope, I'm done. I'm just done. We're done. We're over. And that's when this new covenant comes in, that God makes a promise. So the Israelites broke this Mosaic covenant. Even though God renewed it, they ended up just breaking it done. They violated the covenant. God likens that unto a divorce. They entered into this holy matrimony on Mount Sinai. God says, will you? And they said, we will. Okay. And they entered into this holy covenant together. And Israel was unfaithful to the Lord. The Lord held up his end of the deal. He was even forgiving. He renewed their covenant 7 times. And after that, God said, nope, I'm done. Here's your bill of divorcement. And he divorced Israel. But now, because God made an unconditional promise with Abraham and his physical descendants, he promised and he made provision for the restoration of Israel. Even though Israel was unfaithful, even though Israel broke and invalidated the Mosaic covenant, God promised a restoration. Where? In Jeremiah 31 to 34 in the new covenant. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt in Exodus 19 and 24, which my covenant they break about 8 times. God renewed it 7 times. And then he said, dude, I am done. Okay. Just done. Although I was a husband unto them, not anymore. Here's your bill of divorcement. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. Okay? After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts. They don't like to learn the law. I'll just go ahead and put it on their heart. I'll write it on their hearts. I will be their God, just like I promised Abraham. And they shall be my people, just like I promised Abraham. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor, because they'll have my words on their heart, and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord, because they're going to all know me. Okay, from the least of them unto the greatest, saith the Lord, for I will forgive their iniquity, all of it, and I will remember their sin no more. And so here is where we see these three covenants all tied together, inseparable. And look, we're talking about, look, it started in Genesis 12, right? Genesis 12 with the beginning of the Abrahamic Covenant. And it goes all the way up to the new covenant, which takes us all the way out into eternity, because this is the everlasting covenant that's made in the blood of the shed blood of Jesus Christ, and then gives us the New Testament and all of that. So we get, if we just take these three covenants, just these three, Abrahamic, Mosaic, New, you have the entire Bible except the first 11 chapters. You can't tell me that the Bible is not a covenant corpus with just these three. It's obvious. The Bible is a book of covenants. The unconditional Abrahamic covenant in Genesis 12 promised everlasting, eternal blessing to Israel and Abraham's physical descendants. The conditional Mosaic covenant in Exodus 19 and 24, it laid out God's expectations of those who would be his people. You want to be my people? Here's what I expect. Complete obedience, okay? And Israel, just like anybody else would, Israel failed miserably in that. And so God gave them the new covenant. Now, the new covenant is also unconditional, okay? It's unconditional, just like the Abrahamic covenant. The Abrahamic covenant's unconditional in its entirety, but Moses, Abraham had to fulfill certain things. He had to go leave your family, leave your house. You got to leave your land and go into the land that I'm going to show you. Once he did that, God said, okay, here's my covenant. I will. Unconditional. This is the same thing. I will, and they shall, I will. It's unconditional. But here's the rub. Okay? Who gets in? Who gets into the new covenant? Right? Because God promised this new covenant, which is unconditional, okay, that brings us back to the unconditional covenant, the fulfillment of the unconditional covenant of Abraham. But the problem is, all of the Israelites that come from Abraham are condemned under the Mosaic law. So who gets in? Everybody? Or just one tribe or two tribes? Who gets in? Okay? Who gets the benefit and the blessing of the new covenant? All Israel is promised a blessing in the Abrahamic covenant. All Israel is excluded from that blessing and placed under the curses of Leviticus 26 and later Deuteronomy 28 because of the Mosaic covenant. So everybody gets in, then everybody gets thrown out. Everybody's under blessing, and under the Mosaic covenant, they're under the curse. But all Israel can be blessed under the new covenant. Who gets in? Okay? Who gets in? And that takes us back to the Palestinian covenant. Okay? The Palestinian covenant. You see, everybody gets in with the Abrahamic covenant. God says, I want you to understand what my expectations are. Complete and total devotion. I don't want you to love anything or anybody above me. Well, they failed miserably at that, just like you and me, right? And so they're excluded. Well, God points to this new covenant. He says, hey, I got something here if you want it. Reconciliation. I'll be your God. You'll be my people. I'll forgive your sin and remember it no more. So all of the condemned physical descendants of Abraham, all of the Israelites have a chance to get in. And it's the Palestinian covenant that serves as the filter to get them in. And so that's where I want to end up next time. I want to talk about the Palestinian, or where I want to start next time. Here's where we're going to end this one. I want to talk about the Palestinian covenant. So if you have time and you want to, I suggest reading and marking Deuteronomy 29 and 30. Because in Deuteronomy 29, the nation of Israel is poised on the east side of the River Jordan, and they're getting ready to go across the Jordan and take the promised land, that land that was promised to them through the Abrahamic Covenant, okay, under Joshua. These are the last words of Moses. Moses dies before Israel goes over because he struck the rock when God said, speak to the rock, and he disobeyed God. I mean, that's the deal under the Mosaic Covenant. It's complete obedience or nothing. So God says, look, these are the words of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab. Moab is that land on the other side of Jordan, on the east side of Jordan, where Israel, it's the second generation out of Egypt. The first generation died in the book of Numbers 40 years because they were rebellious, and they walked around 40 years until they all died. This is the second generation getting the second time they're getting the law. This is the renewal of the law after the first generation screwed it all up, okay? Renewal of the Mosaic Covenant. And that's why you got Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is law, the second giving of the law. But when they're in Moab, God makes a new covenant with them. And he says, this is beside the covenant which he made with them in Horeb. Horeb is the area of Mount Sinai. So here's a new covenant, okay? And this whole thing, this whole Palestinian covenant in Deuteronomy 29 and 30, it follows a typical covenant structure. Okay, so you've got a lot of historical stuff going on here, and when you get to chapter 30, here is where you get all the stipulations and the conditions of the Palestinian covenant. And this is going to be the covenant of life in the land. And so instead of calling it the covenant of life in the land for the nation of Israel, which takes too many words, we're going to call it the Palestinian covenant because that's the land. It's the land of Palestine, and it's Israel's. Okay, so that's where we're going to pick it up when we come back. What I want you to see here is this, okay? When we talk about all of this, I want my pens, I want pink. When we talk about the Abrahamic Covenant, that Abrahamic Covenant is an unconditional covenant. God gives promises of life and blessing and in the land. He gives them the promised land. He promises them kings to reign over the nations. He gives them everything. Abraham and his physical descendant through Isaac and Jacob. Jacob was called Israel. And so all that passes to the nation of Israel under the Mosaic Covenant. And under the Mosaic Covenant, God says, hey, look, I want you guys to understand. I want you guys to understand what my conditions are. I want a check mark. Okay, what my conditions are. This is, you want to participate with me in what I'm doing in the kingdom, establishing my kingdom in the creation, extending it throughout all creation. Here's what I want. I just want you to be devoted to me. I want your love. I want your heart. I want your devotion. I want your submission. I want your obedience. I want you to be mine. And Israel said, yeah, we'll do that. And yeah, they screwed it up, man. They didn't, okay? And so we see this new covenant come in, and God says, hey, for all y'all who messed it up under the Mosaic Covenant, okay, you were excluded. But hey, if you want some reconciliation, I tell you what, I can make a reconciliation. He promises them the new covenant. And where do we see the conditions to get in? Palestinian covenant. So that's what we'll break up. We'll pick it up on the next one. Until then, hey, man, I hope you guys are doing well, and I'll see you on the next one.